Hi, everyone. I am Clara Mole. I'm the county coordinator for the Ottawa County Farm Bureau, and Ottawa County Farm Bureau is hosting this, and so we do this once a year, and hopefully soon the Lieutenant Governor will be coming in, and we can hear what's going on in Topeka.
Well, wonderful.
So, welcome.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes.
How about I'll have you pass that around so people can see. And you me to go first? Yes.
Sure.
So, well, I'm very happy to go first. So Elaine Bowers, I represent Senate District 36 in Kansas, and I'm in the my second term in the Senate. It's the third year of a 4-year term. Before that, I served in the House for 6 years, 3 terms in the House. So it's my 13th year in Topeka. And if you all might know, in the room, I'm from Ottawa County. I'm from Delphus and graduated from Minneapolis in 1981. So it'll be fun to go to our high school again and see the kids. And Chris, did you ever put the photos back up on the wall that got water damage that you could flip through? You did find them. Yeah, you found my senior picture. So thank you, Chris. And we're anxious to talk to the kids, too. So that's always a lot of fun, our yearly event. So thanks to Farm Bureau again. It's always nice to come here. And we come here for Lions Club meetings also, so it's a very familiar place. And so in the Senate, this past term, I'm a chairman for the first time, and I kind of feel like I have my wheels under me with being a chairman. The first couple years was kind of learning and discovering the committee process, and Susan can talk about that too because she's a chairman as well, so it's different than just being a member of a committee. But I do serve on 4 committees. My first one meets at 8:30, that's transportation, and as a car dealer, and in my other life I have the Chevy dealership in Concordia and now GMC dealership in Beloit and Concordia Automart for 31 years, so a business owner. No background in politics before I came in. I just went as a business owner, and that's what makes me tick down there is my business brain and common sense. So I've really learned how to navigate the bills, the ideas. So transportation at 8:30, when we talk about what affects the car industry, Department of Revenue, titles and registrations and such, I really understand that. And we also talked about the transportation plan that we're preparing for the next 10 years in Kansas. We've discussed this. We also had the confirmation hearing of the new Secretary of Transportation, Julie Lorenz, and she has done a wonderful job. In fact, with the Transportation Committee Task Force over the summer, she was the chair of that, with the moderator, and came from KDOT for at least 20 years working in that industry. And our governor has chosen people to lead the agencies who have that background, and not just a political appointee. I've been really impressed with the people that she's picked, and they usually come from inside that agency. If we talk about Department of Children and Family, KDHE, and then the Department of Revenue, she's chosen people who came from the trenches, if you might say that, and that really does impress me. The second committee is my committee. It's Elections, Local Government, and Ethics. And this year, we actually had bills that solved problems at home. My bottom line in that committee is, what do we do in there with elections that affects us and our county commissioners and our county clerks? So what we do in that committee, rather than a mandate from Topeka, I want to know from the clerks on what we're passing, is it something we can work with at home? That's very important to me. So I have a really good relationship with the clerks. And here comes our Lieutenant Governor, too. So, and then my next committee is Judiciary. In the Senate, we have 2 lawyers for the first time in the 3 years. So it's fascinating to have lawyers back in the Kansas Senate, which we didn't have before. Good morning, Lieutenant Governor. How are you and your friends? Yeah. Come on up. And
We're just getting started.
All right,
So.
sorry we're late.
So I'm going to pause just a second. Do you want to sit between us, Lynn?
Nope, we're good.
Yeah. Okay.
How are you this morning?
Fine. It's good to see you.
See you.
Yeah. So we're happy to introduce our guest with us. Lieutenant Governor Lynn Rogers is from Wichita. And then you want to introduce who you got with you?
Yes, this is my wife, Chris, and my assistant, Lucas Peterson. So And it's
So-
just a privilege to be here. So good to be in real Kansas. So
Yeah, you're in District 36 and District 107.
107. All
Yeah,
right. All right.
so you have both
Well,
of us,
it's
and-
good to be back to Minneapolis. So used to work here with one of the farm credit people that lived here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, how about, I'll just finish my last committee, and then we'll let Susan chat, and then Lynn will.
I
Okay.
think we can let,
Let them take over, our
Yeah.
special guest.
Yeah.
And so, and then I also have utilities, and that committee is after lunch, and we've been discussing why our electric rates are higher in Kansas than the surrounding states. And I can boil it down to pretty simple. We have upfitted our coal plants. Surrounding states haven't, as a federal mandate. I don't know why they're behind us. And then our transmission of wind and such. So, and did you hear that Kansas is #1 in the wind production? So I think that's really exciting too. And so that's utilities. We have session every day at 2:30, and that's a committee of a whole, all 40 of us. And we can say we have 1 independent, 29 Republicans, and then 10 Democrats. Makes up the difference of our 40. And I think I'll pause right there because it was thrilling to have Lieutenant Governor here with us. He was also a senator with me and sat just a few seats down on the back row. And what's really unique to know is our governor, Lieutenant Governor, were both legislators in Kansas. And I think that's very important because they have been in our shoes. They know what we do. They know how messy the bills are before they become laws to get to the governor's office even. So they feel our pain because it isn't a pretty process making laws in Kansas. So they understand what we're doing on a daily basis. That's important. So, well, I'm going to stop talking. And Lynn, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me here. And I don't want to step on any toes or anything.
you're
but
not stepping on it.
These ladies asked, if I could come, and I wanted to get out and about. I am from Wichita, lived there for the last 33 years with my wife. We've raised 3 kids here in Kansas. I worked for 31 years traveling around the state of Kansas for the farm credit system. So worked for farm credit leasing. So if you've leased an ag building or a tractor through farm credit, I probably worked on that project at some point in time. So worked with all the co-ops and different things. And then I also served on the Wichita School Board for 16 and a half years, including president. So lots of experience on that as well. Never really planned to go to Topeka, but at that time I had a senator that didn't really listen to us on schools, so I ran and did not plan to be lieutenant governor. That was not on my bucket list. So, but Governor Kelly likes to laugh that she just leaned over in the Senate and asked if I was doing anything last summer and would I want to run with her. So, but we traveled around the state. We went to, I think we only ended up getting to about 85 counties and spent about 24,000 miles on the road. So have enjoyed it. And then one of the things that she's assigned me to do is what we're calling the Office of Rural Prosperity. So we're wanting to make sure that anything that we do in our administration is that we look at it and consider it from the standpoint of rural Kansas and small town Kansas, and make sure that we shine a lens of what the needs are there. One size does not fit all in Kansas when you look at the counties and our cities, and it may work great for Wichita or Johnson County, but we've got to tweak it for rural Kansas. So and we're looking at several things, everything from housing, infrastructure, including broadband, how do we expand that, healthcare. We've been doing quite a few tours on healthcare for Medicaid expansion, agribusiness, tourism, and various things like that. So we've had great response. People have been very excited to talk about it, and we've had a lot of groups come to our office in Topeka wanting to be involved. So so we're excited about doing that as well. So just glad to be able to be here, and hope to, if I can answer any questions, we'll be glad to do that. So you've got 2 great legislators here that work across the aisle, and we don't always agree, but we can always talk, can't we?
Yeah.
So, and that's really what Governor Kelly wants to do as well, bring people to the table that haven't had a chance to be listened to, so we're looking forward to that. So
I'm up next.
You're next.
And I'll start off by saying how much I appreciate the openness with the administration. It's been a nice change. So I'm Susan Concannon, your state rep. This is my 7th session that I'm just about ready to wind up now. I'm from Beloit. I grew up in Salina, so this is kind of my neck of the woods. I'm sitting on 3 committees during session. I am on appropriations and taxation. So those are really busy committees, and a lot of important things go on in those committees. I love appropriations. I hate tax, but that's just the nature of the beast. That I'd rather spend money than tax you all. Then I chair a committee called Children's and Seniors, and that in the past has been a 2-day committee, 2 days a week, and just because of a lot of needed foster care reform, they've made it a full-time committee, so we meet every day. And Elaine had mentioned the transitioning from just being on a committee to being the chair of the committee as a new role. I had been the vice chair for 5 years of Health Committee, but moving into the chairmanship is just, it's a whole different schedule to get used to, and a lot of responsibility that those are things behind the scenes that I didn't know were going on before. And so we are digging into foster care and a lot of the issues, as is the administration. And probably the most important legislation that we passed out of that committee this year was the Families First bill that it establishes a framework for the state to be able to draw down federal funds where we can use money at the front end of foster care. And what I mean by front end is before the child is taken from the home. So we've gotten some indication that there are problems, and this is the first time the federal government has allowed money to be used to try to hold that family together, whether it's substance abuse, the treatment for substance abuse, or those type of things, whatever it might be, mental health counseling or something like that. So we got that bill all the way through. It just went straight to the governor. We concurred on the House side to some changes that were made on the Senate side, and the governor will be signing that bill on Monday, and I plan to drive up for that ceremony on Monday. It's like I said, the most important thing that came out of our committee this year. I also sat on what we call the Bob Bethel Can Care Oversight Committee. That's actually a shortened name. It's even longer than that. But Bob Bethel was a much-loved representative that died in a car wreck 7 years ago, or 8 years ago, because it was right as I came in, and I didn't ever know him. But I've heard such great stories about him. So this committee, he always thought there should be oversight if we went to managed care. And so this committee meets 4 times a year and has general oversight over the MCOs and KDHE and KDADs, the departments. And so that's a really important committee, and I actually feel very privileged to be on it. It's a lot of outside work, but we actually have been able to move the needle a little bit. And you probably heard a lot of complaints about Can Care in the beginning, and it's progressed to where it's actually a pretty good system that we're working on now. Working with. So that's kind of where I'm at. We ready for questions? Or
I could say a few more things about the bills in the Senate. We had 240 bills introduced. Not all bills have hearings. Sometimes they're just introduced, and it's very simple to me. A bill is just someone's idea that's put down on paper, and it's legalese writing, which very difficult to understand. Then you have the people who are for it, people who are against it, proponents and opponents, and then the committee, if they decide to work the bill, even after it's had a hearing, then we can make it better, then send it out to the floor. Then there's a possibility it never even gets worked on the floor. and that's called bringing above the line. So we have bills that are under the line on our general orders. I've always thought that was kind of funny. Our agenda for the day, there's actually a line across the page, and it says the line underneath it. So even though 240 bills have been introduced, that's not how many bills that we either work or even vote on. 60 of those went over to the House, and it's kind of a fascinating process at turnaround. And right now we're in the conference committee stage, but at turnaround, the House bills come to the Senate and the Senate bills go to the House. And only 60 of those went to the House. And the first time that I've ever known, I had no House bills come over to my committee, my local government committee and elections. So that's very unusual. And so trying to understand why this could have happened, and I believe it's people trying to figure out how the new administration will work with the legislature. But it's less laws is not necessarily a bad thing. So we're choosy about what bills that we're hearing and working. I might say with the elections, there is one bill that will be really or new law. The governor just signed it 2 days ago, and it was brought to us by Sedgwick County with their election commissioner, and with the backing of their county commissioners, where they can vote anywhere in any voting place on election day, if you have, in this case, the proper equipment. Now here in Ottawa County, you may not be able to print an electronic ballot that people can vote anywhere. So we'll have to see how it works in the rural areas, but it certainly is something Sedgwick County wanted to try, and the bill only had one vote against it, so that's pretty popular. So we'll see how that works, and I'm really anxious to see how that plays out, because we have missed some votes out there that weren't counted for different reasons, and if you're at the wrong polling place too. So another piece in there, and also that came from Sedgwick County, where Lynn is from. Ballots, when you mail in a ballot, if the signature if they forgot to sign the outside of their ballot, or their signatures didn't match, it would not be counted. And this gives the county clerks or the election commissioner an opportunity to correct that before during the ballot counting at the final end. So that's kind of exciting to see that every vote that's cast is counted.
And you never knew if they didn't count your vote, if the signatures didn't. That was the big problem, is
They wouldn't tell you.
they didn't tell you.
So those are some really interesting bills that came out of the election county or commission or election committee. So I'm anxious to see how they work, and you might have to follow up on this, and Wichita let us know how that works. So,
exactly.
Well, let's see what you all like to talk about. We have Farm Bureau here. They did have a healthcare benefit they'd like to offer to their members, and the governor. It's on the governor's desk. Tomorrow's the last day. And I understand, with or without her signature, it'll become law. But so we should watch for that one to see how that affects us out here in rural Kansas, where even during testimony or with the hearing, we had testimony that it's actually interesting from Jewell County, a carload of farmers coming down to watch the hearing, discussing with each other. Half the people in the car didn't have insurance because they couldn't afford it. So this is another attempt as an option, be a membership benefit. So we'll see how this is, and Farm Bureau members really did talk to us about that. So we're happy that could work for rural Kansas. Well, Lynn, you could tell us some things about around the state, maybe.
Well, one of the things I've been doing, these guys have been on break, which basically just means they can come back and do their regular job. And as a senator, we got that break as well. But we have, in the governor's office, we kind of continue to do things. All the bills that they passed do come to the governor's office, and then our staff has to look at them and research them. We don't always have all the same access to all the same information that the legislature has, because they're not always posted. But the governor and our staff do meet on a regular basis. I think there's 16 bills right now that are waiting for a decision from the governor. But one of the things I've been doing as I've been traveling around the state is visiting a lot of our rural hospitals. So been to Hayes and Russell, Emporia, Council Grove, Ottawa. Yesterday was in El Dorado, and primarily on the subject of Medicaid expansions. It's been passed in the House, but not in the Senate, and we have 125 hospitals in the state of Kansas. 85% of them are operating on a negative margin, so that means they're not making money. 29 are on a list of very precarious financial position, and as you know, we've had 4 hospitals that have closed: Independence, Fort Scott, Oswego, and Horton. And Medicaid expansion would not have saved those hospitals per se, but it would have given them some opportunity, some time to replan their existence. And all of the local communities talk about how Medicaid expansion would help. And Medicaid expansion was designed as part of the Affordable Care Act back in 2014. Many of the hospitals, well, all the hospitals in the country gave up funding options. Part of their reimbursement rates were reduced as part of the Affordable Care Act under the premise that all states would expand Medicaid, and so everybody would have insurance. And every state got the option to expand or not. Kansas is one of 14 states so far that has not done that. We have spent, as citizens, about $3.2 billion of our tax dollars, or almost 1.8 million a day, goes to Washington, D.C. to pay for everybody else's health care. And so we've not expanded that. And if we did that, our rural hospitals would have almost $375 million more to spend on their health care and your health care. And so in many cases, what we're seeing as I've traveled around the state is, we've spent $3.2 billion of our dollars going to Washington to pay for somebody else's health care. Many counties put a local mill levy and a sales tax, or both, to help pay for their local hospital. You and I have also paid for it if we have private insurance, because our premiums have gone up to pay for everybody's health care. And then we pay for it in a fourth way in rural Kansas, where it's difficult to recruit professionals, either doctors or health professionals, to come to rural communities, because if a doctor wants to come to a rural hospital and they see they're losing money, do they really want to invest their career in some place like that they won't be able to get their money back in that regard? So we've been doing a lot of that. We're hoping that the Senate will be able to debate that. Right now it's being bottled up by the leadership because and they've admitted that it'll pass next year, but the only thing that really happens with a delay of a year is less money coming to the state. So we're hopeful that there will be a debate, and then if it fails on the floor, where you don't get the 63 in the House and 21 in the Senate, then it needs to die. But our thinking is that we at least need to have a debate on that issue so that Kansans can be heard for what's going on. But what I've really seen as I've traveled is rural Kansas is the ones that are suffering the most from not expanding Medicaid. It actually would help every hospital. The big urban hospitals do get a lot more money, but they're also important for our rural hospitals, because if you can't be treated with a specialty item, you've got to go to a larger hospital to be able to get that service as well. And then many of those larger hospitals also provide specialists that come out to the rural hospitals, and so they really are connected. So we're in Garden City on Tuesday. It's hard to remember what day of the week it is. And that hospital provides $22 million of uncompensated care, and they'd get about $2.5 million back. And it's really different. El Dorado provides $5.5 million of uncompensated care. They get $3.5 million back. So as there's more and more people that are uninsured, that uncompensated care grows, and that somebody has to ultimately pay for it. And if it means the closure of your local hospital, that really is not a good thing. What somebody told me one time, well, it's no big deal if a hospital closes. Well, if you're 30 miles away from a hospital now and it closes, you're then 60 miles away from the next hospital. It's tough. Norton, we were there, or they came into Topeka. They don't have a doctor to deliver babies any longer. And so that's really difficult to recruit people to your community if you don't have medical care for that. So that's one of the things I've been doing as I've been traveling. So I think we've done 14 and have about 4 more hospitals to visit. So.
And I'd like to follow up on that just a little bit, that it's not that the smaller hospitals aren't managed as well. No. It's at once upon a time, the critical access hospitals, because the federal government realizes that we need higher reimbursement. We were paid 101% of cost. Then when sequestration happened a few years ago, that got knocked down to 100, and then 99, and I believe it's at 98, and that's where it stays. The other thing is, we don't have any bargaining power. We're not big enough to be able to negotiate rates with Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever other private insurance. And so they tell us, we're just going to pay you what Medicare pays. So you're back to 98% of cost. And so, once upon a time, people thought that all those losses were made up with your private insurance, and you see your rates go up. They still don't pay the insurance company. The insurance company doesn't reimburse any more than what Medicare does. And then you have all the uncompensated care that we just can't absorb in the smaller community. And it was mentioned the local mill levy. When you've seen hospitals close so far, they've been operated out of state. They've been owned and operated, and so those are business decisions. But for us, when you get out here where these are community hospitals, it's so important for us to have our hospitals. We're not making a business decision in trying to keep them open. It's more emotional. It's more tied to the community, and you could end up paying for it twice then, because if they increase your property taxes to keep your local hospital open, what we really need to do is get back to the original plan and expand Medicaid. And I believe we had 80 votes in the House when it passed the House. It was, if it wasn't 80, it was 79 or close to it.
It really is a non-partisan issue. I mean, we had Republicans and Democrats both in the House that supported that. In the same way, when it passed in 2017, it really was what was best for your district was what we saw in that response. So,
what is the reimbursement then? Did I miss something of what Medicaid actually pays?
Well, Medicaid rates are low.
Right.
They are low. Kansas is one of the lowest reimbursement rates in the country. It would mean for the rural hospitals anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000 per year.
So it would be a very insignificant percentage.
For some hospitals, it could be anywhere from 11% to 200% of their uncompensated care. It really does vary based on their mix and everything. But one of the ways I like to explain it is that, and this would fit or affect about 150,000 Kansans. There's about 240,000 that are uninsured from what I remember, if those numbers are correct. But right now, those people have access to health care through the emergency room. If a patient goes to an emergency room, the hospital is obligated to provide it, whether they get paid or not. So really what we're talking about is Medicaid expansion moves them from emergency room care to preventative care, where they can go in at a lower cost. The hospitals and doctors can do it through clinics, and it will cost the hospital less. They'll get a little bit of compensation compared to zero compensation for emergency room. So that's kind of an easier way to look at it.
Right, that was what I understood.
I have learned on this that hospitals and compensation and reimbursement rates are very complicated. So
Right. And it is low. The reimbursement rate is low, but when you're talking about a hospital that maybe only made $24,000 last year, then and you're saying they could have $300,000 per year. That's a doctor. They could hire a new doctor there, and or some of the big state of the art.
And one of the concerns I think we have to think about too is with Nebraska expanding Medicaid. One of the things I heard in Marysville and other hospitals that are on that northern tier of counties is that Nebraska clinics and Nebraska hospitals will start being able to pay more, and we'll start recruiting some of our health professionals across the border to work. They may not necessarily move there, but we could lose a lot of our behavioral health, a lot of our nurse practitioners and people like that, which could again impact our hospitals because it's so difficult to recruit medical professionals to our communities. Yeah.
And they're full.
Yeah, that's what
Well,
they
and
got.
we've learned a lot of experience from what other states have done, what they've done right and what they've done wrong.
Yeah.
And I think I was just in New Orleans, actually with my husband for a meeting, but was asking some questions, and they've created 7,000 new jobs from expansion. So they're a newer state to.
And a lot of people think,
expand.
you know, they don't want to give an able-bodied person a benefit that they don't deserve. But, you know, 60, 70%, almost 2/3 of the people that would qualify, you're talking, like for a single person, they're making less than 12,000. So that's minimum wage, 30 hours a week is what you're talking about. They're people that are, in most cases, underemployed. Those 2/3, they're working already, but they're working at minimum wage or less, or sometimes 2 jobs to try to make up for it because their company won't provide them health care or won't provide them enough hours to qualify for health care. So that's one of the issues that it affects too. And then the other 30%, other third that would cover, some of those are folks that are either staying at home taking care of somebody that's disabled and so they don't qualify, or they're partially disabled themselves, but not enough to qualify for Medicaid under the current plan. So the argument that they're not able-bodied or that we got to make them work, they're probably already working. And even if we required, what we've seen in some other states, they required 80 hours of work, they worked for a company that they had no control over how many hours they worked. They'd get sent home if there wasn't work. And so they, at the end of the month, they couldn't prove that they'd worked 80 hours, but it wasn't necessarily their fault. So.
It is fascinating to know with rural health care, our daughter Haley is a doctor now, family med, and she's one of the rural scholars. And in fact, she shadowed Susan's husband, Craig, with they're accepted as sophomores in college, and then a spot is saved for them in medical school, and they focus on rural health care and family med. So watching Haley discover where she wants to raise her family at, which is back here with us, and then what does it take to bring those kids back out to us? So this is one way that KU Medical Center has worked through legislation over 10, maybe 20 years now that actually is working, and people Haley's age are looking for a stable environment, and they're looking for a nice place to work in the hospitals and such, and the quality of life that we all know and expect is what they're looking for too. So she'll be out in 2 years looking where she's going to raise her family, and it does matter on what the facilities are. So this is something those young docs are talking about too.
And so, excuse me, so that goes back into the ROS program where the counties.
Oh, ROS.
Yeah, ROS. And the counties help pay for, I mean, the state pays for it.
The buy-in, yeah.
Yeah, and they're to get the people to come back to the rural communities. So, I think
And
that's a
does Ottawa County, do you participate in the match too? Some counties have chose not to, and some do.
We still are, and we have, all of ours are active right now. I mean, as high as we can be, but I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I always like that program. And then knowing that Lynn is working on the rural revitalization.
Real prosperity stuff,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really exciting to know that it's not just about Johnson County or Sedgwick County, that it is as out here in the rest of the state. And I might just mention here, and we'll grab your question here in a sec, industrial hemp is a really big idea now that Kansas is one of the leading states on how are we going to foster and grow this new crop, which uses less water, and that's exciting. But Russell County, which is in District 36, has really been a forerunner on how they are going to, they were a pilot county, and other states or other counties in the state can do this as well. But because they were out front running with this, they have a new plant moving from Utah that will build custom harvest heads just for this crop. up to 250 employees is what they're shooting for right now.
Yeah.
And
Their first employee actually moved to Russell this last week or so. They have 10 kids, so increase the population. So,
that's right, and into the schools too. And
Yeah.
so that's really exciting to know that not only did the state step up with the Department of Commerce on funds to this rural county, where a lot of times we see these dollars going to the east coast of Kansas or Sedgwick County, but here out with us. And that's really exciting to us, and that we understand, and that this administration understands how it's important. And Governor Brownback did start that RAWS program too, which I was very excited about too.
we're our new Secretary of Commerce, David Toland, has just started a RFP to look at all of our economic development opportunities. And one of the big sections that we're asking on the RFP is how to work with our rural communities and smaller towns, so that all the emphasis is not just put on our larger geographic areas. So,
Well, should we grab your question? Sorry about that.
This is the biggest question, how is this gonna be paid for, the Medicaid?
okay.
Okay,
Well,
expansion.
the Medicaid expansion, we're estimated in our budget, we included it in our budget, we're anticipating about $30 million a year. One of the things that's important is to, every fiscal note or every bill has a fiscal note in terms of what it's gonna cost and all. And the unfortunate part is it just talks about what it costs to the general fund, it doesn't take into everything else. But for that 30 million, what that does is it saves us about $11 million in our Department of Corrections, which isn't counted in the 30 million. That's for inmates that we currently pay 100% of their health care for, and this would move some of them, I don't know exactly how many, to a 90% federal cost. It also allows us to put, of that population of 150,000, women that, if they come on to the program at the 90-10 and then they become pregnant, we get reimbursed 90% for the pregnancy and the healthcare costs, as opposed to them coming on in the current program where they only get 56%. That's about a $9 million savings to the Medicaid fund. And then the House put on a amendment where each participant in the program would pay a $25 a month premium, which I think they estimate about $20 million for that. But then the other part too is it doesn't take into consideration, KU estimated that we would probably put in 12,000 jobs into the state. So that generates a lot of tax revenue. I think Louisiana was the same one, over $100 million of additional revenue came into the state. Yesterday in El Dorado, it would mean $10 million more of healthcare costs, payments. So that goes to home health, that goes to pharmacies, that goes to all the other people besides even the doctors and the hospitals. That extra spending generates extra spending, there's a multiplier effect. So I think there's a great economic imperative and a great business plan for how it gets paid for. Because we're, again, like I said, we're paying for it already in so many other ways. But there's also a great moral imperative, of covering our neighbors and our friends. Many of us could be in that same boat very easily. And that's one of the things we've heard again in agriculture. Many could qualify for the Affordable Care Act, but then the next year they may not be able to. So we've got to have some stability on some of that.
Now, how many insurance companies are there in Kansas now? Is it just Blue Cross Blue Shield? Is there private?
I don't know for the exact plan on that one. In rural Kansas, Blue Cross and Blue Shield is one of the only networks that's available. In Wichita and Johnson County, there are 2 or 3, I believe, but it's a limited number. So
we're not allowed to bring over state lines? We don't work over state lines?
Not for healthcare.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just said not for healthcare.
Not for healthcare. So yeah.
So if that was possible, wouldn't that help drive down costs also?
Competition's always good.
Yeah, it could. I mean, that would have to be something legislatively they'd have to look
That's
at.
something that Kansas is responsible. I mean, they're saying, no, this is set number we have right now.
Mhm.
Is that something you all be willing to work on, is bringing?
Yeah, I don't think we'd have any objection to looking at that. We'd have to see what the consequences are for, the Kansas healthcare system. You don't want to bankrupt somebody that's already here too,
I
so.
understand that.
Well, I think it's,
Is it federal?
yeah, what's that?
Medica sells.
Oh, Medica.
Oh.
Well, I thought maybe there was some federal regulation that kept us from it with, there
Yeah.
is, okay.
Well, I think he's trying to break.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was in Washington last week and talked with all of our legislative sessions, and I spent some time with Senator Roberts, and that, healthcare is an issue that we have to address. A lot of that does have to be done on a federal level. There's limited amount of what we can do here. So, but I know with Vicki Schmidt now as our insurance commissioner, I know that's healthcare has always been a huge concern for her. So I know that's something she'll probably be watching for as well.
So what you're saying is this isn't gonna raise individual taxes, this Medicaid is not.
Well, it'll include, there's some money out of our state general fund, but we think in the long run it will pay back and return the amount of money for us that, will cover that, so.
Does that also include women's health care, as in abortion?
It does not cover any abortion, and that was even an
Medicaid
amendment that they added, but it didn't, even before the amendment, it didn't, Medicaid could not be spent for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked about rule of office prosperity.
It's hard to say that, isn't it? Hard, yeah.
And then how to bring back health professionals. Is there any discussion within that organization or as a whole in terms of the beginning farmer rancher and getting those people back? I think we're nearing 57, 58 years old for the average age of the producer. Obviously, times aren't great right now, so it's not as appealing to come back as it was 5 years ago. But still, there's, I guess, what do they say, the struggle is real.
Yeah.
About getting young farmers and ranchers back to rural communities, because they're a business just like the hardware store is.
Right.
And so I think, there is a definite succession or generational transfer issue that we're kind of up against here. But not only that, there's a community transition or a community succession problem with getting not only professional type jobs, but successors for the hardware store, successors for the barber shop, and those types of things. So I'm curious just what kind of discussions are happening, maybe specific to ag, but then maybe as the rural community as a whole.
Well, when we talk about the Office of Rural Prosperity, we're not talking about adding a lot of people in Topeka. I just want you to know that. We'll have a couple staff people that'll help us, but part of our work, we really see it as working through communities of helping with leadership and direction. And one of the things I made a remark, answer to a question the other day, is that part of it is helping communities transition to younger leaders. Sometimes people don't want to, us old white guys don't want to give things up, and we have got to do that sometimes, but, and that's where we go forward. One of the things we've talked about, when you talk about the retail, the hardware stores and stuff, we do, part of it is retail and Main Street, how do we keep those vibrant and keep those in place? We are planning a listening tour, probably late May, early June, and maybe even until July, where we're going to target about 10 cities around the state, and we'll hit multiple cities once we get out to an area. And quite frankly, I don't know if that tour will ever end. I'm guessing the governor will put me on the road throughout all 4 years, which I love. It's really great to get outside of Topeka. But one of the things is we want to, when we're in those communities, we want to ask, what do they see as prosperity? What is it that you would count, or if you met that goal, you would say, yeah, we're more prosperous than we were a year ago. In some communities, what we're hearing is it could be a meeting place, a coffee shop that they don't have, where you can go together. Others, it might be, and what we're seeing, there's some really great things going on in rural Kansas. We don't like to brag about ourselves, it's that Kansas nice, and what we're trying to figure out is how do we catalog those successes so that another community that's thinking about it can do the same thing. For instance, Lindsborg folks came in a few weeks ago. They're really working on trying to put in a daycare center because they've got a lot of professional jobs, and those people that are moving in need daycare. And so we're going to connect them with other communities that have already done that. So they kind of know, how do they talk to people at the Department of Health and Environment? How do they, where do they need to go to make those steps easier? So that's part of where we're going. We haven't talked about the transition of ag. I know that's a big issue in a lot of the ag communities. Again, we don't want to use this office as duplicating something that's already being done, but how do we highlight focus and put direction on things that are going on. And one of the messages I take to Johnson County, to Sedgwick County, to Shawnee County, is how vital rural Kansas is to urban Kansas. The Senate district that I cover, District 25, if you're ever been in Wichita, if you've been in Riverside, it'd be the near west and near south side of downtown. We didn't include downtown, but it's a very compact urban area. I don't think I have any farmland at all in my area. And I can get across it in 20 minutes, which that's a hard thing for your 12,000 miles. But the number 2, 3 industry in that district was agribusiness. I had all the implement dealers on Southwest Street. I had the Farmland Foods plant. I had a number of little manufacturers that made things for rural Kansas. So when rural Kansas was not buying, my neighbors were not working. And so agribusiness is really key to urban Kansas. And as I've said, as we've traveled, in Russell, I was very impressed with their hospital. But I said it's important to have a great hospital here, because if I'm traveling through to Colorado or somewhere else and I have a health issue or an accident, I want to make sure that I get my health needs taken care of. And so, that's why all of that together is so vital. So those are the things we're talking about. It hasn't all been identified and planned, but we do have kind of an outline on our website that's available, and we can get that for you as well. But what we really want to do is welcome, your input, and part of our listening tour truly is listening so that we don't get out ahead of where rural Kansas needs to be. So that was a long answer to a short question, I'm sorry.
I might add on, besides all the great work that's coming out from the Lieutenant Governor, the House has a new committee that's called Rural Revitalization. And the chairman of that is the former majority leader, who's a farmer rancher from Dighton. And he has had wonderful hearings all session on multiple days on any issue that you can imagine, living rural, healthcare and agribusiness, broadband. They have covered it. There were a lot of mornings that I wished that I could go and be there, but I didn't want to skip appropriations. So,
I actually spoke to that group, and we had a great brainstorming session afterwards of, like for instance, how do we deal with grocery stores, with food deserts.
Grocery stores.
Representative Baker from Council Grove even suggested he had some professional friends that had been in the grocery business. He said, could we put a task force together? And we never ever once talked about Democrat or Republican in that discussion. We talked about rural Kansas. How do we? And there are some urban legislators that are on that committee as well, and so that's really helpful to make sure that we have everybody's input.
Yeah. It might be a good time to tell you we have our new ag secretary is a farm kid from Jewell County. His name is Mike Beam. He came from KLA after being there 30 plus years. And I didn't know this. When I went to his confirmation hearing, he was an extension agent in Dickinson County. Yeah. So he has local county level experience as well. So Mike in his department has something that could work with you also in their program. So working with agencies that already exist, but also knowing that someone grew up just like we did who understands and knows how to work with the administration. So if Mike can come around and tour with us also, and that's agritourism.
I think quite a few. I have a sub-cabinet meeting every 2 weeks. Department of Ag, Department of Commerce, KDHE, Department of Transportation, the Water Office, and there's somebody else, I can't remember now who the fifth one is. But we've also, we've had interest from labor and things, and just to talk about rural issues so that we don't get a silo mentality of each department doing their own thing. So we're really working on that regard too.
Governor, we have a couple school superintendents that are here.
Oh, okay.
We haven't talked about
education. And we haven't talked about education yet.
Yeah,
so maybe that's a topic we ought to go to next. Do you guys have any comments, or do you want us to just?
We appreciate the passage of the bills that we're supporting public ed. We really, really do. We know that's a difficult decision you guys had to make up there, and how it causes a lot of issues with, should we put forth a constitutional amendment? That would be a question I would have, is what is the feeling about a constitutional amendment to remove education from that protected class?
I'll, as a former school board member, the first time I ran for school board, I was at an event, and this 96-year-old lady was there, and she said, "Young man, my husband was on the school board in Sterling, and he always thought everyone should serve at least one sentence on their local school board." So I served 4. But I really think a constitutional amendment, at least what's been projected or proposed in the past, would be the death knell for our rural schools. I think it's much more dangerous for our rural communities than for our urban. And I think that can be very difficult. I think we have a good formula now. I think the bill that was passed, I think, will satisfy the courts. I don't anticipate the courts to give up jurisdiction for a period of time. That would be my guess, which I think is fine, because we do need to make sure that we implement the plan so that we don't get back to litigation and all. But at least we're hopeful in that regard. And I think schools will then, we really need schools to work on implementing the reforms that you need to show student achievement, which I know schools are doing on a regular basis. The last 5 years before last year's plan, where we put the 5-year plan in place, those 5 years were very difficult. I mean, many schools were simply just trying to keep the doors open, and teachers weren't getting pay raises. We weren't purchasing anything more than what was necessary. Those were difficult times, and you can't plan for new projects or new plans. Some of the things that put in last year with the mental health services, I mean, that's just a very big issue that school districts are facing, whether it's urban or rural. So I'm encouraged by that, and the governor now would like us to focus on how do we improve, encourage more teachers and more students to get into the teaching profession. It's kind of like farming. If you're not making money, people don't want to go into it. If schools are controversial and you're not getting raises, people don't want to go into it. They'll go into an industry that will. So hopefully stability will give us some time to start recovering and rebuilding our capacity as a state.
I think it's important to understand as well that you talked about hospitals not being able to recruit doctors. Teaching's we're in the same boat.
Same boat.
We probably 5 to 10 years ago, for an elementary position, we'd have anywhere between 40 and 50, 60 applicants, probably 10 years ago. We're lucky to have 1 or 2 now.
Wow.
And that's across the state. That's not just here.
Yeah, even in Wichita, that's, they have a little bit more, but there's still a lot fewer applicants than ever before.
Real quick, are one of you the superintendent for the Minneapolis schools here?
I am.
Do you know Principal Macy at the high school?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay, well, his son was on my floor at K-State. I've seen a report.
Luke is a good K-Stater. So.
Jay's working back for us at Twin Valley now, so.
I have that position open, so
You may not want to get stories from the dorm floor, so that.
His son Josh does want to go into teaching.
Yes.
At least one, and I'm pretty sure he wants to come back to, I don't know about Minneapolis, but somewhere.
I'm sure Twin Valley is right.
Well,
Get a little competition.
I have a senior daughter who wants to be a high school math teacher, so that is good news.
Oh, yeah.
She's not scared of going into education.
Yeah.
Living with her mom and I, who both
Or educators.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
To see that.
Yeah, well, that's good.
We do. We need educators, and that's across the United States.
Well, one of the stories that we heard when we were talking about this Office of Rural Prosperity, one superintendent told me that they have no housing in their community. It's a small school district, and so the teacher that they hired, drives in 35 miles every day, and was so excited at the beginning of the school year, but by the end of driving that long, got really tired, and so took a job with the school district where they lived. And so that's one of the things we see. We've got to have housing available close by so they can participate in the community as well. They can volunteer or go to church together and do those kinds of things. So,
one thing too to keep in mind, and I know that I communicate with Elaine and Susan pretty regularly about stuff. They get tired of me.
We don't get tired.
Never.
Just know that your local boards of education have taken the new dollars and have tried to raise salaries. This is my 3rd year in this position. When I first got there, the base salary was like $29,400.
Oh, wow.
And we have raised it at least to where we're a few $100s away from Chris, but we keep competing back and forth. We're gonna try to beat Minneapolis. Because it is a competition.
It is, yeah.
As
I
it
mean,
relates to
part of
that. So,
Well, and I had
the new
a,
dollars have gone to that. We're at least up to 33.8 now, which we're very excited about. But
I had an individual relating to the health, was talking about, you don't have to pay doctors as much if you put them in rural Kansas as you put them in urban. And one of the things I said was, but their education costs the same. Same with the teacher, when you're going to K-State or KU or wherever, you're still paying the same education costs, so.
We might just say here, since they alluded to this, we have a great working relationship with our superintendents, actually across our districts even. But these two text us, email us, and not form letters. They actually say, here's what we think about this bill and how it would help or hurt this district. We just want you to know this. So that's very important to us that we're engaged like that. So you never bother us. We really value your opinion and that you're comfortable with us out also.
A question as it relates to conservation, and I know none of you have a crystal ball, but there's a coalition of agricultural groups and conservation groups and wildlife groups that are working on the feasibility of a statewide conservation fund for the state of Kansas. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but they've organized far enough now that they've raised enough money to do an official poll where they went out and spoke with, members of the state of Kansas to find out what their feelings are and how well they would support conservation in Kansas. And I think at least the preliminary results that it was overwhelmingly supportive of that. And the idea is that we don't really have a centralized fund. I mean, there's different departments that get funds, but we don't have a statewide fund for water, wildlife, soil, rangeland and all that. Do you feel like, and again, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you feel like, or where would you feel like that would go in the process of enacting something like that? If they brought good, valid information, I mean, it's probably going to involve some tax dollars. It will involve some tax dollars, so.
The Governor Brownback had a 50-year water plan, and we do have a line item for the water office, and it was never ever funded during the previous administration. I think maybe we got a couple million put into there last year, but we're funding it this year. I don't know where that is in the conference committee negotiations. It's hard to follow all that, but I think with all of the focus on rural, that would have a lot of appeal.
Now's maybe
Yeah.
the time that would
Well,
be something.
and I would
we could-
agree. I mean, that plan was originally, I think when it was established, it was supposed to be funded about $8 million a year, and of course, with our revenues, we couldn't do it. And we do want to bring that back so we have full funding, and so that we can look at that. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild our financial condition as a state, with the debt that we've got outstanding, and so it's going to be a slow process to put us back on shape. But we are moving in the right direction. And I know the groups really do, water and ag. I mean, we've started talking about some of those issues. I'd love to, I'm not aware of that particular poll or that group, so I'd love to get in touch with that, and we'll definitely provide what resources we can. So,
What's the plan to repay the highway fund? Because I noticed our roads aren't as good a shape as they used to be.
well, and that's part of it too. We had part of Governor Kelly's plan this year on our budget was to stop some of that transfer out. We're not quite sure where we're at either, because there's been a number of things added by some legislators to, for special things. So it's really going to come down to the veto session as to what gets in there and what doesn't. But our plan is to close the bank of KDOT. Where we don't use that for general expenses, that we use it for highways. And the only way to do that, though, is to rebuild our financial condition so that we don't have to depend on that. So.
But as far as this year, there's still a transfer.
Yeah.
I mean, we just have to. There's no other way to.
We're we're hoping that we can get a new transportation plan built, maybe next legislative session. I know that's one thing the governor's, we're gonna work on during the break, working with legislators. You know, there was a task force last year that met and had some suggestions. There's some preliminary actions, but, and then our new Secretary of Transportation, Julie Lorenz, really is an expert on highways and different things, and really sees it as, highways are really a way to get people from one place to another. It's not just the sake of a road, it's to get, maybe it's a bus, maybe it's a car, maybe it's a truck. We've even talked about using the right-of-ways for broadband access, where, our telcos and rural telephone companies can generate, can plant fiber there so that they can put in broadband for other areas down the road, so.
Currently, there's still some of the T-Works projects that were never completed. They had to stop a few years ago when we kept making the transfers. So that's the goal now, is to wind
Finish
up.
those,
Yeah,
yeah.
finish all of those. We can't get it all done this year. There's not enough money, but we're still moving towards completing as much of that as we can.
One of those is in Russell County, and at least it's on the list. You can see it, so you know it's moving forward. So that's exciting. There's a few bills we passed out of transportation. One was new registration fees for electric cars on one of the options of one way that we can help pay for this plan. And I believe that if it's not on our desk now,
I can't remember on that one if that's there or not. I think it
Yeah,
is.
it is.
There,
Yeah,
and
okay,
then
she
my
hasn't signed it.
newsletters.
Okay, and then there's a second one of, we hadn't increased the fees on oversized loads and large structures being moved. And those were lower than our neighboring states, so some of those fees have changed also. So there is some mechanism in there to start forward with this transportation plan with the funding.
I think one of the things that we're also seeing right now too is some of our highways are having a lot heavier use because of the roads in Nebraska that have been closed.
In northern part.
My hometown was kind of an island up there with the water, and it's about 35 miles from Omaha to Fremont, which is near my hometown. It now takes 175 miles to get to Fremont from Omaha because of the highways that have been closed. And so we can learn how that worked and all, but we have seen some of our other highways get a lot heavier use with trucks and big loads. So that's something we're concerned about as well, so that they, stay in good repair. So.
Hey, one thing, just a sec, we'll get to you. One thing that Elaine and I usually do, and we forgot to do when we got started, was to pass around a piece of paper if you would like to receive our newsletters and add your email address. Would one of you guys have an extra piece of paper that you could start that on? But anyway, if the sheet's coming around, if you would put your email and your name so that we know who it is. Sometimes you can't tell by the email address, so.
We might talk about email just a little bit, what we get in Topeka. If you can imagine the olden days when they would receive mail letters, we now probably have anywhere between 25 and 100 emails overnight that we have waiting for us when we go in the next morning. And sometimes if there's a specific issue, if you see the button on a page that says forward this to your legislator, we'll get the same form letter over and over and over, and it can come from all over the state. So what we're looking for is, if you take our cards, if you send us a few sentences or a paragraph of, you like this bill, and if you don't, how would you like us to offer an amendment to fix it in your opinion? Those are the kind of emails that we're looking for, is how we solve problems for back here. But we can get overwhelmed. Sometimes they're from all over the world, even. It's just been amazing.
And if you're using a bill number, it's helpful when you contact us if you also put what the topic is. That saves, I'm not good at remembering bill numbers, and it saves us from having to look it up. We produce on the House side, we have 125 members compared to their 40, and we produce a lot more bills, and it's just hard to keep track of them. Plus, sometimes in the conference committee, they end up changing the bill number. Yeah. So, long process, but.
I was only in the Senate for 2 years, but I think the record was 940 emails in an evening.
Yeah.
So, and what I was really helpful, always helped me, is if I knew that person lived in my district. So if you live in one of these two districts, make sure you let them know, because those always take higher attention than others. So.
Yeah, we'll go back to him first, thanks.
I wanted to bring up transportation. I trucked for 17 years and I'm retired now, so this problem doesn't bother me, but I'm very concerned about it. And the problem is, I pulled double trailers so I could go 85.5 anywhere in the state of Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, except for on the interstate. You cannot go over 80,000 pounds on the interstate, no matter how many axles you have. Me and about 50 other truckers went to Topeka back in middle 80s sometime with bandits. I had letters from Nancy Cassabaum and Bob Dole stating that it's up to the state. If they want to pass a special permit to run on the interstate, it's legal. We had permits for Kansas for Nebraska and Oklahoma. We could not get anything for Kansas. We went to Topeka twice.
And you could do it in Nebraska and in Oklahoma. Well,
I
that's
thought we dealt
interesting.
with that last year.
Well, I'm just trying to think.
And we went
We did.
twice, and we were turned down. They said they couldn't do it.
Okay.
How long ago was that?
This was back in the middle 80s.
Okay.
Okay. Now, last year, I've got 3 good friends now that pull triple axles. Now you can run 90,000 in Kansas.
Yeah.
Legal. And you can buy permits. And they bought their permits. But they cannot go over on the interstate over 80,000. Now, I run all over Kansas hauling grain.
Yeah.
If I hauled rock to a road project out in western Kansas, and then we load wheat out there, and when we come back, we'd have to come back on 40 or 18. If we wanted to go to Kansas City, we had to take 24 or 40. This is the most ridiculous.
We did do the 90,000 last year, but I don't remember even the interstate issue coming up,
No,
so.
this is the most ridiculous situation.
Okay.
And most people in Kansas, I'm sure, don't understand and don't know about this.
Yeah.
But if they did, they'd be raising holy hell, and this is why.
Yeah.
Think of the damage to the secondary roads
Yeah.
and bridges and safety
Yeah.
if you could be on the interstate instead of the 2 lanes.
Yeah.
It is absolutely ridiculous.
We'll try to check that.
And it needs to be changed.
Yeah.
These guys already have permits for 90,000 legal.
Yeah.
And they've got the axles. That needs to be changed.
Yeah. Good.
And the thing, it does affect rural Kansas because a lot of these farmers, when they're not doing the other kind, they're hauling grain.
Something else. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
or their sons they don't have enough income, so they
Yeah.
have a son
To
driving.
help generate two generations. Yeah. Exactly.
But
Okay.
in many cases, it would take the wear and tear off the secondary roads and bridges.
Yeah.
I don't know how many millions of dollars we're talking about. We're talking about a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I hauled corn out of Bruni, Nebraska to Oklahoma and Texas for 10 years straight, year round.
Yeah.
And when I'd get to Salina, I had to take the two lane down to McPherson and Lynnsburg. And then when I got in Oklahoma, I'd go back on the interstate.
Oh, wow.
Are you gonna be seeing Julie?
I will see Julie. We'll ask her. I'll make sure I get your
Talk to
name
the
and we'll talk about it.
transportation,
Sure will. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're talking to the right guy who has
We'll
the,
see what we can find out for you.
We have another
And I
question.
was gonna bring you a 2-page letter, but my printer broke down.
Oh. We'll get you an email. You can email it to me. So.
I just had a question, I guess an ignorant question more or less, about procedural type things, and I know there's a government etiquette on how things operate, so.
I should be, yeah.
What is the best way, if you have ideas, I mean, I know we can contact you, but this is a several part question. Is it appropriate to contact legislators from other districts? Because I know you mentioned if you're not in the district, it's a little, you kind of go down the priority list a little bit, but, so is it appropriate to contact representatives from other districts that may be chairing a committee that you have special interest
Particularly,
in?
yeah.
And then I know you don't just invite yourself to give testimony. I mean, how is the best way, if you've got something that you want to share, do you need to contact first them and have them invite you, or how does that work?
You don't have to be invited. If you know that something has a hearing, you submit testimony and get on the list to testify. Yeah, you don't have to be asked. You just have to know that it's going to happen. And that's all public information. But, yeah, especially the chairman, or if you know that there's a legislator that has some expertise on a topic, you write them a personal email or even a phone call first. But, yeah, that's not inappropriate at all. It's the ones, I think what Elaine was mentioning from not being in our district is when we're getting a whole lot of form letters. And you can tell by some of the email addresses that they're not, or they may even mention that they're not.
Do they have a process for like a hearing to make sure that someone's not coming in just wasting their time and talking
Nope.
about something?
Nope.
There's no way okay.
No, it's public, and now they can time limit you. The chairman makes the rules for their committee, and then the committee adopts the rules. But if it's a hearing that's going to have a list of 30 proponents or opponents, but the testimony has to be limited. Then they put a timer on it.
Would it be safe to say it's probably more appropriate to contact the committee member ahead of time and say, hey, I'm thinking about offering this?
Yeah, the chairman, or if you have your representative or senator is on the committee, that might be a door to open to get the attention of the chairman. But yeah, there's some rules on like turning in your testimony 24 hours ahead of time, but it just depends on the committee, and you turn it into the committee secretary then.
And we're happy to help you with that too. So if you need however, in my committee, we have 30 copies that needs to be provided. If I need to make the copies for you, so the assistant has them to put out at our stations when we sit down at our desks, and you'll have your electronic, because it is public record afterwards. It's stored and saved, and people can pull up your testimony and look at it. But we're happy to help you too. And if you have an idea for a bill, you can email us, and then we send that to a reviser, and then they put it in the legalese writing for you. Or you can meet with the reviser too. And so and we're happy to go with you to do that as well. Or if you want, a lot of times we have questions from back home in the district that I don't know the answer, but that's research. And research is in the garden level. We don't call it the basement. But what we do is send that. Yeah, that's right. I was down there for a while too. So you work in the garden level. Just remember that. So you send us that question. We're going to find a researcher who will answer that very specific for you, and that could get you started on what. Remember, your idea is a bill. So if you'd like to have it introduced, we can help you work through that too. It is a fascinating process. It truly is. It's vetting is what it is.
And I would say too, we have a constituent services office in the governor's office that you can contact for any state agency. You can always talk to your rep and your senator if you've got a question about a state agency, and then they would forward it over to us, and we'll get back to you on that. But there's our website, kansas.gov, I think, and you can go in and submit ideas or thoughts there as well. So we'd welcome those as well. But yeah, with good legislators that can help direct you in the right way, that's a good starting point. And most legislators, if there's an idea that they're willing to sponsor, they would like to have people come in from Kansas to testify. So if, even if it's an urban Kansas legislator that you like, contacting them and say you support that idea, they'd be probably thrilled to have you provide testimony. So.
And there can be written testimony too, where you don't have to show up also. And that goes into the folder, and then the public record as well.
I have to say, it's not as impactful as you being there.
And we love having our people from home there as well. Have you ever testified in front of a committee
Not
before?
on an individual deal, it's been
Yeah.
organizational.
And
that's why I kind of figured it, because the organization set it all
Set
up,
up.
so I'm saying, all right, it was an invitation deal, so.
Yeah.
Well, and if your idea is coming through an organization like, say, KLA or Farm Bureau, they have lobbyists in the building that would help as well, even though you're doing it individually, because that's part of what their services are too. So there's a lot of different ways to help, but I strongly encourage you to do it, and And, but, you know, we hear, a lot of the testimony that we hear are from lobbyists for different organizations, and depending on the committee, we tend to hear a lot from them during session. It's very refreshing to have someone from home come up.
And you remember, the Capitol's a working museum. It's where the history, when you walk in, you're in the visitor center. It's just a fabulous building, but it's we have microphones. It's very modern too, and it's a tremendous place to come visit for a day. Go to the top of the dome even. That's really fascinating. And then pages. We haven't talked about pages from home. If you have grandkids or kids that you'd like to come hang out with us, that's I was a page for Bill Fuller 30-some years ago, but, you know, Bev Mortimer's daddy. And that was, remember Bev Mortimer? Yeah, and Bill. So that was a good experience. And my picture's black and white, and I still show the page. I say, this was me, and you can come do this also when you grow up. And so we love having the kids with us, that they can see that you can be a mom and a grandma and a business owner, and that we're citizen legislators. And that's the beauty of this job. We're only there 90 days or thereabout, and then we come back. We come home on the weekends, but we live at home. And that's the best part about this job, is we can be there for a while, but come home and live. And our quality of life, we like to say here.
Yes.
And then we have interns also. They're college students. Were you an intern, Corey?
I actually wasn't.
No? So,
Just our campaign.
That's right. So they come. I have a girl this year who wrote a paper on a gal in Senate District 36 from Marshall County. She was the first female war correspondent. Oh, yeah. So World War I. Her name is Peggy Hall. We'll talk about your mural here in a second. So I asked Caitlin she was a law student at KU, and I asked, does this interest you if you'd write a paper on this woman that not many people in Kansas know? And she does. So and then we'll publicize it for her. I haven't sent it out yet, so I haven't actually read it. I'm anxious to know this. So Lynn has this cool office, and whenever you come to visit us, we're going to go see Lynn.
Yeah, she always comes.
So there's a mural by a Hayes artist. It's a whole wall of 6 panels in his conference room. And an artist traveled for a year going to all of our different communities, seeing what historical pieces, like the first lighted baseball game in the United States was played in Kansas, down in the bottom southeast. Yeah. And the fascinating things like that too. And that's where I saw this woman up there with a helmet. Who is that lady? And now we know, so we'll know more. Yeah. And so we bring groups down to see.
It's a well-kept secret, but not to your district.
No, we're friends. So Susan's district would be 2 panels. Senate District 36 is 3 panels. So we cover a big part of Kansas, and it's just a fascinating piece of history. That it's kind of one of the best kept secrets there.
It is, but it's a beautiful. We'd love to have you come anytime. So.
The Secretary of State's office is a ceremonial office. They'll have press conferences in there, but that was, if you think of the Capitol being the courthouse of the state, that's where you would go do your paperwork, forming a corporation, or right there in Topeka, the treasurer's office used to be in the building. Just a fabulous place, and we did restore it when I first came. One wing was always under renovation, and so it's been going on a very long time. But now it's just stunning.
What's interesting is my Senate office was the first wing, where we're at. That was built in the 1860s. So just think about how long that is. So
1860s. Mm-hmm. Well.
I have an issue. Anyone who knows me very well knows I have a passion. I can't let this go by, I'm sorry. When you made a comment about the amount of money that was leaving our state because of the Medicaid.
Uh-huh.
Did it not raise any flags whatever when the state custody, the children in state custody increased in 2011 from 2,400 to the number as high as 7,700 in 2018 at $600 a month. 2011, our calculation, and it might have been less, was 1,440,000 a month that went to care for the child in foster care. That is not all the ancillary, the professional staff that it takes. In 2018, there were as many as 7,400, maybe as many as 7,700 times 600. These are large
Increases.
large numbers.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think our state population maintained not a high growth rate, possibly a static,
Yeah.
and that alone was, should have been red flags all over the place, and I don't think very many people were aware of it. It is also estimated by people who have really looked into it that there may be as many as 60% or more children that are in state custody because of unsubstantiated charges. They simply did not look into it. The DCF, the department in Kansas, has been deemed by, it was the KOSS, which looks at all of the departments, as the most dysfunctional, chaotic, inefficient departments that operates in the state of Kansas. And it continues. And anyone who has had any exchange whatever with them is absolutely scared to death to challenge the most chaotic, inefficient, failure-filled department. I do not understand any of this.
Well, we're trying to fix it.
A new secretary.
The governor has thrown $40 to $50 million Band-Aid on it.
Well, it's.
And it was.
It's more than that.
from what I have- Yes, that was initial.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm not saying it's more dollars.
Yes,
There's,
was, yes,
Yeah.
was a reliable and very good cause
Yeah.
that it went to. But there was promised tremendous changes. There has to be tremendous changes.
Well, and we're working on those. I mean, we're less than 100 days into our administration, but you know, and
And this
the
is
legislature.
huge. This is huge.
Yeah, one of the
It's
reasons
all
that the cost was, you know, our social workers got their workload really increased. So we're trying to add a number of social workers, and part of the problem is there's not as many that are. I mean, that's a tight industry as well in terms of availability. So we are working on those. We've changed our. We have a new secretary. We're trying to relook at all of the different software programs that don't interact with each other, and there is a lot of work to be done on that. There is absolutely no doubt about it, because our kids and their safety is a huge priority. And I have to say that was the number one thing that brought every legislator to their feet in the Governor Kelly's State of the State message, was to deal with our child welfare system. And yeah, I know you guys, Susan, you've done a lot, and there's a lot being done, and we definitely have to do it.
I have sent emails to every member, and I have had 0 responses. I guess I ask questions they don't want to hear. But I have had 0 response from any member.
Yeah. And I can't tell you why on that one,
I
but
wouldn't like that very much.
no, and that's difficult.
I would like to get their, like I said a few minutes ago, I'd like to get their text number, so I
Yeah.
can, maybe they respond to text, because they do not respond to emails.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I would say on that is that these legislators are part-time. They're not full-time, and they also don't have secretaries, support staff for anything other than during the session. So I was retired as a senator, so I was able to respond a little bit faster and a little bit quicker. Some are better than others. And even if you send the message, it doesn't necessarily mean it gets ignored. They do read it, and the vast majority understand it. But I would assure you, I mean, between the child welfare committees and all the groups, we've started to identify the things that need to change. The last year of Governor Collier's, they were starting on that path. You know, I think with Secretary Howard, we're moving that path. I was just in the DCS offices the other day, and you know, many of the agencies have really, you know, you'd go into the offices and the atmosphere was very negative and down, and people are what I noticed was they were really wanting to work together. They're excited, you know, that they see us moving forward on some of those things. So I think we'll start seeing some benefits from that. The problem with it, the problems are so deep. As we've gotten into some of these agencies, the cuts have been so deep, and the workloads have been added so difficult that and you know, none of us want to pay more taxes than we have to, but we do want to make sure our kids are safe, that, you know, our money is used wisely, that basic services are accomplished, and you know, our state employees work hard when they're, you know, and they want to be held accountable, and so I think the management that's really where a lot of that's going to come down to. So.
And one of the things that I proposed, I had a bill in Children and Seniors that had a hearing that would have an oversight committee, where I came from health and the privatization of Medicaid into CanCare. I kind of was horrified when I started digging into foster care and saw that there's no oversight over any of the program. You know, DCF maybe has oversight of the two privatized companies, KVC and St. Francis in the state of Kansas. But so I wrote a bill that would model what we have as the, for the CanCare oversight, only it would be foster care or child welfare oversight. And that got buried below the line right after the Medicaid expansion vote. So I have 4 bills sitting below the line that probably won't see the light of day this year, but hoping for it for next year. And I think that is, I kind of had a discussion with the governor about it, and I talked to our speaker. And
I mean, we've had some too in terms of, you know, tracking the runaways, that they wanted more, the Senate wanted more runaways and or more tracking of that, and they wanted more runaways. No, yeah. Don't quote me on that one, Jim. But you know, what happened is we put into policy effect right away basically those same things, so that that information's available. You know, the governor gets notified now when there is a runaway. You know, some of those things to start putting some accountability in, that there's oversight of all these kind of things. So, but it's slow. It's you know, you got to move the boat.
It's a huge problem because it hasn't just happened under Brownback's administration with the decline.
Pretty much.
It's been such a horrendous situation for so many years.
And then another thing that this oversight committee would provide is a voice for you. You know, anyone who would want to come testify. That's what we do at the CanCare Oversight Committee. Is we have just the first morning is all public comment, and it's timed, and you don't get very much time. But you know, as we've seen things improve with CanCare, fewer and fewer people are coming to Topeka to complain. And that's what we're hoping will happen. You know, it'll be Katie bar the door if when we get it off the ground. But there'll be a lot of people coming to talk. But not, you know, hoping to reduce the number of children brought into care, reduce the number of people who are upset with the system. You know, there's a lot of ways to measure some success there. So.
Well, it's Governor Kelly is now the the one that they're suing. So we're addressing it. And our 3 priorities this year is Medicaid expansion, resolving the school finance, and then reworking the child welfare system. And those are, we really see 2 of those 3 are life and death situations. They affect the life and death of people. And what we kind of laugh sometimes in our staff. We have one that's in charge of the fires, the big things that are on fire, and then we have another one that's just in charge of the fires that are just simply smoldering. And so there's a lot of issues in Department of Corrections and Department of Revenue and Department of Labor. I mean, the list goes on and on. But at least Department of Revenue and Department of Labor, they're not life and death situations like they are in DCF and corrections. So.
It does
I think one thing that a lot of us have been concerned about on the Medicaid expansion is will the amount of federal money keep coming in years to come?
And that's a good question. And the thing is that the only way to change that is an act of Congress. The president can't change it and a bureaucrat can't change it. It has to be an act of Congress. And so
You mean the amount that keeps coming?
the 90-10 split, that has to be changed only by an act of Congress, and they have never changed a benefit like that. So
That's one thing many people are concerned.
yeah. But, at the same point, we don't question that when it comes to our Department of Roads. When the federal government gives us 90% on roads and we have to do a 10% match, we don't say, okay, well, we're not gonna take this 90% because we don't know if they're gonna stick with it or not. We take it and use it, and that's the same way with Medicaid. And the law that with the House passed is that if that ever does change, then we're obligated to stop the program here. So
That's what our bill has.
that's what the bill had. So there is a
Poison
protection
pill.
for that.
Poison.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to run to the school, but we appreciate all of you coming this morning, and
Thank you for coming.
yeah, thanks for all the
And our
questions.
county commissioners too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You snuck in. I didn't see that.